Hey adventurers, so today is going to be a video that I've done twice before, or rather parts 1 and parts 2 before, but now I'm doing a part 3, and that is my adventure through Arthurian literature. And so I'll make sure that I have both my Arthurian playlist as well as these two videos linked in this video so that you guys can go watch those fairly easily. But basically this is just me talking about my experiences and the thoughts as I go through the various Arthurian literature stories that I've read over the years, or since the last time I've done a video like this. There's several that I have and that I need to read, but I try and do this after a significant chunk, but not so many that it takes forever for me to get through. My first two videos are probably longer than this one is going to be, but I do want to go through and talk about the books that I've read, because I've read a significant amount of them now since my last time that I did one of these videos. So the last time, I don't know the exact date that I did the last one, but it was right after I read The Once and Future King by T.H. White. And I've got several other books on my shelves that I need to read that are Arthurian, stuff like that. And then I've actually read a good, nine other books that are Arthurian or Arthurian related directly. There's things that I've read that are Arthurian related indirectly. For example, Wheel of Time is indirectly Arthurian, Harry Potter is even indirectly Arthurian, stuff like that. And so there's stories, short stories, whatever it might be, that are indirectly Arthurian related, and I'm not really going to be touching on any of those for this time because I have 9 books that I need to go through, although it shouldn't be too terribly long. Realistically, it's four things that I'll be talking about. So the first one that I did, and I actually read this book twice because the first time I read it was long enough ago and I didn't do a review of it because I didn't have enough. My review on Goodreads was basically, I need to read this again so that I can actually do an adequate review. Essentially something like that. I enjoyed it greatly. But that is Phantastes by George MacDonald. So this is a classic story, fantasy, fairy tale, if you want to call it that, that was heavily inspirational for the likes of Tolkien and Lewis, and is not super heavily Arthurian, but there is a little bit of Arthurian, there's a little bit of Arthurian referencing that goes on directly referencing the Arthurian literature or the Arthurian myth and stuff like that. I actually just reread this book for the express purpose of, I do not have anything to say about this book if I make this video, and this video being the one that I'm currently making in my adventure through Arthurian Lit Part 3. And so I wanted to reread it and be able to do a review of it, an actual review of it, which will now be months away because of how far I am behind on my reviews, but that's alright. I wanted to reread it and have an actual review of it and be able to talk a little bit about it in this video. So it's very light on the Arthurian aspects. Basically, so our main character goes into fairyland, and as he's there, he comes across a character who seems to be Sir Percival. There's also lots of references to Sir Galahad and various other Arthurian related instances, but we see him come directly in contact with somebody that seems to be Sir Percival, or at least a reflection of Sir Percival in some way or another. And so, with that, it is directly enough related to Arthurian literature that I wanted to mention it. I also have read it twice, since both of them, I believe, since I read The Once and Future King. I'm not positive about that. But either way, it was one that I was glad to go back and read, and one that I really enjoyed. And it's not super heavy on the Arthurian references, but there's a lot of things that you can see how this book is referencing and is taking from these same ideas that are present in all of the Arthurian myths. And so that's kind of why I wanted to mention it. I have significantly less to say about it than I probably do than with all of these others, but I did want to talk about it and mention that I have read it twice now. Listened to it on audiobooks. The first time I listened to it on LibriVox, which is just a whole bunch of volunteers, and the narration is really not very good, which is part of why I had such a hard time understanding it and just not understanding what I was listening to. But the second time I listened to it on Hoopla and through my local library, And the narrator, it was a little bit confusing because the main character is a guy and the narrator was female, and so that kind of clashed a little bit because she's saying me, my, I, stuff like that, and in a feminine voice when it's a male character, and that kind of clashed a little bit. It was kind of hard to understand, but because I'd read it previously, I knew what was going on, and I could, for the most part, adjust my understanding of what was going on, and that helped a lot. But the second time was a much better narration. I could actually understand the story a lot clearer. There was things that I found out about that I completely forgot when I first listened to the story, and so it was good for me to be able to go back and listen to it, and I'm very happy that I did. I still don't know if I know what's going on in that book, and I think part of that is intentional. I think part of that is, oh, this is a character going into fairyland, you aren't going to understand all that's going on because it's fairyland. And I enjoy that. I actually really enjoy the story that's being told, what I can understand of it. So yeah, I will leave that one there at that point, and we will move on to the next book that I have, which is The Buried Giant by Kazuo Ishiguro. This is a post-Arthurian story. Takes place after the fall of Arthur, and in a post-Arthur Britain, and we see it's a story of a man and his wife going on an adventure towards the end of their life to try and the goal, as stated at the beginning, is to find their son. We find out that there's a lot more to that as they go through it, and they go on various adventures as they go. They meet various characters. One of the characters that they actually meet is Sir Gawain, and so it's very directly Arthurian, but it is post-Arthur, and so there is no Arthur remaining. There is a little bit of the influence of Arthur left on this world and on this land, but it is very much that age is passing. These are some of the last people who remembered that age, and it's in that way it's kind of really interesting. It's written more as a literary fiction or a magical realism type story rather than fantasy or rather than pure Arthurian, and that could have been really interesting. That could have been really good and could have really added a lot to this story if the author would have dug in and explored these themes that he was trying to far more than he did. At least this is my opinion. I feel like because he was dealing with a lot of themes of like death and memory and stuff like that, and I wanted him to go a little bit deeper into those and explore them just a little bit more than he did. They were there and they were almost interesting, but they just weren't quite as well explored as I was hoping that they were, as I was hoping that they would be, and because of that I was a little bit disappointed in it. The story is enjoyable enough. I'm perfectly happy to have this on my shelf, on my Arthurian shelf. It is not a favorite book of all time, but as a piece of Arthurian literature, I like that it shows I like that it approaches the story from a different perspective, from a slightly different perspective, and look at this story than most of the other Arthurian stories do, which are largely focused on the fantasy aspects, on the mythological aspects of this story. And this was not that. This was focused very much on the two characters and on their journey, and quite a bit on the themes, but just it felt almost like a shallow exploration. It wasn't digging into the themes as much as I was quite honestly hoping that it would. So that is my thoughts on The Buried Giant, but it was very good to read to help me get back into the world. I read this in, I believe, January of 2024, February, and so it was really early in last year, and then throughout the rest towards the end of 2024, I dug back into Arthurian literature and read all the rest of the ones that I'm going to be talking about here, except Phantastes, which I read, I think, in 2023, and then again, just as of the time of filming this, 2 days ago. So, yeah. So the next thing that I read is actually a series, or the 5 books in the series that were out at the time of when I read them. There is a prequel that it's kind of, I don't know, it's not even a prequel. It's set before some of the books and after some of the other books and stuff like that. But I read the 5 books that were out at the time in the series, and that is the Pendragon Cycle by Stephen R. Lawhead, starting with Taliesin, and then book 2 is Merlin, book 3 is Arthur, book 4 is Pendragon, and book 5 is Grail. And then the prequel-ish book is titled Aurelia, and I need to read that, but I haven't yet. So this is one that has been on my list to read for a long time. I only own the 2 books physically. I started reading Taliesin physically, and I don't remember where I got to in the book, 30-ish%, something like that. So about a third of the way into the book, and I switched to audio because I was running out of time to physically read and knew I'd have more time to read on audio, listen to audiobooks at that point, and so I decided to switch, and it was a good idea for me because I was able to then binge the entire series. I don't really want to spoil the rest of my reviews because you'll probably be watching this video before the rest of my reviews for this series are out. I currently have Taliesin has been published, my review for Taliesin has been published, and I have edited my review for Merlin Book 2. And so I've got the other 3 books in the series to go, but I don't think any of those will be out before this video is published. It depends on when I decide to put this one up, but I don't know. Anyways, that's not important at the moment. What is important is me talking about these books and what I think about these books. So I don't want to spoil my reviews, but basically, as a whole, this is a very enjoyable series. I liked a lot of what's going on with this series and a lot of what Lawhead is doing here. This is much more focused on, it's directly focused on the Arthurian myth, on Taliesin and Merlin. Those 2 books 1 and 2 take place before Arthur is even born. And so there's a lot that doesn't get worked into the Arthurian myth, but it's setting up for how this series is going to deal with the myth and the major players and the things that are going to affect the story of Arthur once he comes into his own. And so we see, well, first off, Taliesin starts with the fall of Atlantis, which that's a great place to start a story. I love Atlantis. That's one of my favorite myths outside of the Arthurian myth. And so it starts with Atlantis, and it ties in so much of these things. If you watched my part 2 video, I talked about the Lyonesse trilogy by Jack Vance, which is also pre-Arthurian and deals directly with Atlantis. The Elder Isles, which in so many of the Arthurian stories are where the Atlantis myth came from and stuff like that. The legend of Atlantis came from. This one deals with it slightly differently. This is basically Merlin is a descendant of the Atlanteans. And so through that, it's very, very much tied to that, and that's where Merlin gets a lot of his power, also through the Druids and stuff like that, and various other cultures in the land at that time. But also, beyond that, this is viewed through the lens of Christianity coming into the British Isles, and how that really affects the whole world, and how it's written for, so a lot of times Merlin is viewed as strictly a druidic character. A lot of times he's viewed as a Christian character or some mix of the two. This is another one where it's very Christian in its approach to telling these stories, and it just looks at everything through a more Christian lens. And so it's kind of cool to the approach to this, because it's very different than a lot of the other stories, where a lot of the stories are just like, all right, let's go as fantasy as we possibly can with it. Some of them are, let's go as historically accurate as we possibly can with it, or things like that. Whereas this takes it and says, let's look at it historically accurate, but also with Christianity as a major influence on this series. Obviously, Galahad has always been a major Christian, how do I say this? Galahad has kind of been the representation of Christianity within the realm of King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table. And so that's expanded out, branched out quite a bit into a lot more than just that. But I really enjoy a lot of what he's doing with the series as a whole, and I don't think the books are individually as great as the whole of this series is. I really feel like Taliesin and Merlin especially are fantastic books. The other 3 that I read, Arthur, Pendragon, and Grail, are less amazing. But the whole of the series that's being told, and the whole of the story is really interesting, and I really appreciate that, and I really like all of the Arthurian, all of the Christianity aspects that are in this series, and how Lawhead ties that all together, while also telling a good story. So then the last thing that I read that I am putting in this, and this is a little bit more kind of indirect, but also very obvious in its Arthurian connections, and that is The Wizard Knight by Jane Wolfe, so the duology of the knight and the wizard. And so the knight deals significantly less with the Arthurian aspects, whereas the wizard really starts digging into them. There are some in the knight, but it's mostly the second half of this duology, being the wizard, that we actually start exploring how this character, how Sir Abel of the High Heart is part of the Arthurian court and stuff like that. And we get all these different, in the wizard we get all these different references to King Arthur's court. The names are all different, slightly tweaked. Like Arthur is not Arthur, it's Arnthor, Arnthur, I think, as well, maybe OR. But basically, I mean, you know that it's King Arthur, and you meet all these various knights and characters and stuff like that that are very clearly the knights from the King Arthur myth, and just tweaked a little bit to fit into this world that's and the things that are going on here, which this world is basically, it's interesting because he is on the world of the humans. He is where Mythgarther, maybe, is that what it's called? Which is basically just Earth. It is not modern Earth, even though he came from modern Earth, but he is not in fairyland or anything like that. Come on, where is the image so that I can get the words that I need? There it is. So yeah, Mythgarther. So Aelfris, Muspel, and Niflheim are below Mythgarther, and then Skye, Cleos, and Elysion are above Mythgarther. And so it's basically just these portions of the world, and what we're primarily dealing with is Mythgarther, which is essentially Earth. It's somehow our character is transported from a modern setting to this more medieval setting of Earth, but it's not Earth that we know because it's not the actual locations. Like the Earth has changed. It's hard to explain how it all works. But essentially, what ends up happening is this character, the Wizard Knight, Sir Abel of the High Heart, becomes entangled with a whole bunch of events that kind of in some way reflect the various King Arthur tales. And so it's not like directly connected to the Arthurian myth, but it is adjacent in a way. And I don't know, I'm having a hard time explaining this, and it is kind of in a lot of ways less, this is in a lot of ways less of an Arthurian mythology video, an adventure through Arthurian lit video, because really the only one that is truly Arthurian is the Pendragon cycle. The rest of them are somehow adjacent to the Arthurian myth, but not directly tied into it, even if they have references, even if they have things that are clearly from the Arthurian myth. So Jane Wolfe, obviously, he's one of those authors that people consider to be confusing, I guess, to be somebody that you have to think about, that you have to explore and do a little bit of research as you're reading their books to truly understand what's going on. And I can see that as after having read the book, I can see, yeah, there was more there than I was getting, but I could also just read the story for the story that was going on and enjoy that. And so of the two books, because the Arthurian references were amped up in The Wizard, I ended up enjoying The Wizard more than I had the Knight. But they're very similar. There's a lot of good storytelling going on here. There's a lot of weird stuff going on in this book, in these books as well. But largely it's just a very enjoyable story as well. It was a good first foray into Wolfe. I need to read more. Book of the New Sun is his big, or his solar cycle, I guess, is his big series that everybody knows him for. And I do want to read that at some point. But I wanted to do this one specifically because it was Arthurian, but then also specifically because I was reading it with Liam from Liam's Lyceum. He was the one who said, hey, do you want to read this with me? And I said, yeah, let's do that. It's Arthurian. And turns out the first book I was reading, I was like, where's the Arthurian reference? Where is Arthur in this story? How is this an Arthurian story? But then as I got to the end of the Knight and was still thinking that, I was like, this isn't super Arthurian. I guess kind of, maybe just because it's like knights and going on adventures and going through these woods and dealing with all these things. Maybe that's why they consider it Arthurian. But then, having read The Wizard, I can definitely see why it's considered Arthurian, or Arthuriana, even if it's not directly related to the Arthurian myth in that way. But yeah, there's a lot of good stuff. I overall really have enjoyed spending some time getting back into the Arthurian myth, because it's been a while. I started this series of which this is part 3, immediately after I had finished a college class about medieval literature in which we studied specifically Arthurian literature. And so I had been inundated for a semester on just reading a whole bunch of Arthurian literature, and it was a fantastic time, and I had lots of great discussion, and it was really good, and it's a myth that I've loved, and so I wanted to keep going through that. But then I kind of petered off, and I read a few books here and there as I went. But then 2024 was the first time where I kind of really dug back into the Arthurian myth at all, by reading 9 books, as I mentioned, in the Arthurian myth, or Arthurian related, and that was just really nice. It was really fun to get to. It was really good experience to actually get back into some Arthurian literature and just understand what's going on with it, because it's a world and it's a setting that I love, and a myth that I love, and there's some themes that can be dealt with in the Arthurian myth that, for some reason, I said it this way in, I believe, my review of Taliesin, that the Arthurian myth is a vehicle for exploring these types of themes, and they're themes of like memory and death and aging and stuff like that are very hard to explore in a lot of other settings, or maybe not hard to explore, but it's just so easy to explore them within the Arthurian setting. And I love that. I love the focus on themes that is always with Arthurian literature, and just the myth, as I've mentioned several times here. There's so much to enjoy about the Arthurian everything, and I can't wait to continue exploring this. I know Aurelia is going to be one. I'm probably going to pick up the audiobook and read that next. It's probably my next audiobook, quite honestly. I've also got many other on my shelves currently that I need to read. I have many other written down on my notes app for these ones Arthurian, just so that I can reference back to them and be like, I need to read this one, or I need to pick this one up if I see him in the bookstore or something like that. And so I will absolutely keep doing these videos as I come across more and more to do, but it's just been very fun reading these, getting back into the Arthurian myth after so long of an absence, because I don't think I read hardly anything. I don't know how long it was, but there was a long gap between when I read The Once and Future King and when I got back into it with binging all 5 books in the Pendragon cycle. Technically, The Buried Giant was in there at the beginning of 2024, but it was like a one and done type thing. And then the back half of the year was actually loaded pretty heavily with Arthurian literature. And so anyways, that's all that I really got to say about this. It's been really good getting back into Arthurian lit, and that's basically what this video is supposed to say. Thank you guys for watching an Erudite Adventure. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you guys again soon. Stay warm.